Hello everyone, this is Caitlin again. In this third section, we're going to transition to the third and final article that everyone read. It's the one entitled Collaborative Information Retrieval in Information Intensive Domain. So I know that everyone has already read the paper and kind of knows the basics of it, but I just want to do a quick recap of the main points before I move on and expand on the topic. So first, it's important to remember that this paper talks about a study conducted in Stockholm, Sweden at a patent application office, which is kind of a cool, unique setting. The authors really emphasized at the beginning of the paper that it was kind of a significant one because it was on site and the researchers were immersed in the real life work setting of the patent handling process, meaning that it was not like some type of artificial lab experiment with little practical significance. They were actually there observing the people a good deal of the time. The entire study took place over a 2-month period, and they convinced 9 of the patent engineers to participate, which initially sounds like a pretty small sample size. I know I thought that, but each of the participants had to complete a number of tasks, and they also had to ask other people to help them. So at the end of the study, there was quite a bit of data to collect from just those 9 people. To be more specific about that, each of the participants had to undergo an initial interview at the start of the study, and then another interview at the end. Plus, they were observed for anywhere between 7 to 8 hours each day by the researchers, and they even had to fill out a daily, what was called an electronic diary, which detailed all the tasks and decisions they had to make that day. And then they would have to submit this diary back to the researchers at the conclusion of each day. Personally, I was a bit unsure how I felt about having the participants keep these diaries because although it certainly seemed to yield some great responses from the patent engineers, like for instance, one of them, would put in their diary about how they couldn't solve something on their own, or they didn't know the answer themselves, so they had to go to someone else, a colleague of theirs, to help them. So basically, the diaries definitely yielded a lot of great info about how the patent engineers would share with one another information, how they actively went to seek it from other colleagues. But at the same time, I remember I just discussed a few weeks ago, I think it was week 6, in the discussion section with a classmate of mine, that sometimes these subjective measures can be tricky because it was in the Kaljal et al. Article where the authors kind of suggested that the biases and psychological states of research participants might have a negative impact on a study as well. Because, for instance, the authors in that paper actually even acknowledged that one of the potential drawbacks of their case study was that by asking the engineers to think of past situations when they, quote, tried to retrieve or seek information during their job, situation easily tempts them to exaggerate their information seeking and successes in it, which can lead to, quote, inaccuracies, and possible distortions in research results. And this is otherwise known as the constructing reality effect. So in other words, basically the engineers were asked to fill out these daily electronic journals if they want to be part of the study, and in turn, the participants might have felt compelled to embellish the records of what actually happened during the day or what they actually thought about throughout the entire workday. I'm not saying this actually happened, but it's a known fact that this constructing reality effect happens, and it could have affected the results. But that was my only qualm with it. Anyway, before I move on to a different subject, let's briefly go over the main gist of this study. Essentially, there is this persistent myth out there in the HIV community that information seeking and information retrieval are, as the authors of this study put it, an individual activity or isolated situation, which basically means that most of the work already out there on this subject assumes that the information seeker is an individual rather than a person acting in a group, and this group would, bounce information off each other and share with one another. But after conducting this study, the researchers actually found plenty of evidence for their argument that information seeking and retrieval can be a collaborative activity, especially in an organization setting where employees often deal with unfamiliar or new information on a regular basis, like the patent engineers obviously would, because they're dealing with one day law documents, and the next day they're dealing with pretty much practically anything. This finding has also been backed and supported by other studies. For instance, if you look at my annotated bibliography for my group, you'll see an article about a field study that examined collaborative activities observed in a patient care team in an emergency room, and they found much of the same results. So this study it's not the only of its kind.